Dan Jacob Wallace, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me, Professor O'Kane. How are you doing?
You're very, very welcome. I'm doing really well, and I'm really chuffed to have you here, and you're a most welcome guest. I came across your videos, unlike many people who've heard of you, who saw you on Rick Beato's channel. I'd heard about you months before, or you just happened to show up on my feed, and I thought there's something about this guy's music that is so anti-Instagram, and that's why I immediately loved it. And the more I checked out what you've posted, the more I was really, really enjoying the deep and sometimes very mournful quality of your music.
Shadows are thin, sins are mostly forgotten. Shadows are long, they cast beyond the burning sun. I know it's late again. I know I'm late again.
And I was just wondering if you could tell me, one of the things that I see you write on a lot of your posts is that you took 10 years off of music. Are you a professional musician? I mean, you certainly play and sound like one. I mean, is that your livelihood? And how did it go taking all of that time off?
I've never made a living at music. I have tried. Sort of. I don't know that I've done all the stuff you're supposed to do, but I've certainly wanted to make a living at music, and I stopped because after several years, I'd say about 10 years of pushing really hard, writing songs and putting out albums and stuff like that, I was starting to feel like maybe I needed to do something a little more secure. Excuse me. But it was also kind of a burnout. Mm-hmm. And I happened to get very interested in philosophy, and my obsession kind of moved over to that. And I thought I might pursue that. But little by little, I mean, I kind of always had it in the back of my mind, I might get back to music. And there were some things here and there that would happen that would remind me of that. Mm-hmm. And around 2014, 15, I started thinking about it more. And by 2019, I was thinking about it even more. I was starting to pull out old sheet music and look at it, but I didn't have anything set up where I could do music or anything like that. I was just looking at sheet music, basically. Mostly just old stuff that was handwritten that I had in folders. And then 2020, I moved from New York to Milwaukee, actually. And I skipped that part, but I had moved to New York to study philosophy from Chicago. Yeah, so around 2020, I started remixing some old stuff, or just mixing stuff I had never mixed, and was working on my computers from like 15 or 20 years earlier. Yeah, and by 2021, I was just right back at it. like still a little bit on the fence, but definitely back at it. And that's when I started making videos, was in 2021, starting with a few kind of jazz covers, which I'd never done before. I'm not a jazz musician. And then I started doing my own music again.
So did you go to music school?
No.
How did you learn to write like you do? Like, when did it, I want to say when did it all start, but most people, at least that we see today, who write that kind of music that you're writing, have to go through the whole music school, thing. And it's very interesting that you haven't. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I started playing guitar when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
I learned, I learned a Run DMC song that I wanted to learn from my stepdad. So they actually were putting a lot of guitar in their music in the 80s. Like, they did something with Aerosmith. They did Walk This Way. And as I understand it, Aerosmith actually, they went in the studio. They didn't sample, not that there's anything wrong with sampling, but they collaborated on a version of it. And if I recall, Aerosmith's in the video, but it wasn't that. That would have been too hard. I just wanted to impress my friends. So I learned, my stepdad showed me some power chords, and I said, this is it. This is the only thing I'm going to do. And then I said, why don't you show me something else? Because I liked it. And he showed me, I remember it was open chords, C, G, and D. Mm-hmm. And it was to the tune of It's So Easy to Fall in Love. And I don't really remember what happened next, but I was just absolutely obsessed. Then it was, you couldn't get me away from the guitar for a couple of years. When I was 14, I wanted to go to this public arts school where I was living. It was in Jacksonville, Florida, Douglas Anderson. And I thought you had to know all this music theory just to get in for the audition. So I got a couple of music theory books, and they were thin. They were like part 1, part 2, part 3, that kind of thing. And I just read them. And that's when I learned how to count rhythms and stuff like that. I'd also been learning stuff out of guitar magazines. Mm-hmm. But just using the tablature, I didn't know how to read the music, I don't think, maybe a little bit. But it was then when I read those theory books that I learned, I don't remember exactly, but I can tell you I don't think I've ever really learned any more theory since then. Except a Joe Satriani article that I remember reading maybe 2 years later in one of the guitar I think it was Guitar for a Practicing Musician, about how to build chords. And that was, I remember that, and I think I still use that, like if I have to put a chord together. But yeah, that was it. And then from there, I did read some books on orchestration later, because I started becoming more and more interested in composing, but I wasn't composing for any particular instrument. Like, I would just sit and try to write fugues and things like that. And that started... Yeah, that all started when I was 14. So I started sitting and just writing music. And
now, something you told me earlier in a discussion that we had is that you write a lot of your music without an instrument.
Yeah, that would have started then.
And yet you don't have perfect pitch?
No, and I don't... That started then because I wanted to work on music, and I would sit in class and I would just write out the staff lines and then just start composing, and I'd bring it home and play it on my guitar. And over time, I just got better at doing that. But I'd say at first, I didn't know what I was doing. And like not in terms of, it like I'm breaking some rules of counterpoint or something like this. But it was just, I didn't know really what it sounded like, except that I know that if I write a third, it has a certain sound to it. And if I go to a minor third, it has a certain sound to it. But in terms of how does this all work emotionally and that sort of thing, and how do I take a theme and then run with it? I wouldn't know how to do that. This is all within a few months of starting.
So as far as like the rules of orchestration, ranges and transpositions and all of that stuff, you learned all of that at age 14?
No. So I wasn't thinking about that kind of stuff then. I don't remember when I started. It might have been, I think by the following year when I was 15. I can say that by 16, 17. By 17, I wasn't really playing guitar anymore. So at some point while 17, I had just switched over to composing naturally. I had drifted away from guitar, and I didn't pick guitar back up really, aside from here and there. But I didn't play regularly or anything until I was about 25, and that was to back myself as a songwriter, basically. So it was acoustic, nylon acoustic. But I think, so I had to get my resources from the school library or whatever. And I can't really remember, but somehow I would have gotten a book that said, just has a chart. These are the ranges. But I didn't at that point. I honestly don't remember. But at some point I had to learn that, if you have a clarinet and you go up higher in the range, it starts to get a certain sound versus lower in the range. And how are you going to blend the instruments? But that would come from listening to a lot of music and getting a hold of some scores.
So you've obviously delved very deeply into dissonance because it's all over your music. Who were some of the artists? Well, who were some of the composers, the classical composers that you heard that did that, and then also who were some of the maybe rock artists that had done that?
Well, yeah, I guess Frank Zappa would have been one. Cacophony would have been one. As far as composers, I actually would say Bach and Mozart and Chopin, those were ones I was really into at first. I mean, I still love that stuff. And what I did notice was that there is a lot more dissonance in it than is often acknowledged. I'm not saying you're not acknowledging that at all, but I'm just saying, like, there's this idea that music goes from being very consonant, that I've encountered anyway, to being more and more dissonant by the time you get into the 20th century. And certainly, like, in terms of hardcore dissonance that could go through an entire piece of music, you're going to find more of that later. But just the kind of the building of tension and then resolving that, I think it would have been stuff like Bach and Mozart, but also, I guess in terms of stuff that was a little on the weirder side, that would have been Steve Vai would have been the first person I think I would have encountered that with, and then Cacophony, and then probably Frank Zappa. But then later I was exploring a lot of the stuff that Frank Zappa would talk about, a lot of the composers he would mention. And then I would just get all kinds of stuff from the library. And I do know when I was 18, I think I was 18 when Kronos Quartet, not long after they came out with their Black Angels album, they had Shostakovich's Eighth String Quartet on there. And when I heard that, that was a huge, just a huge event for me. It kind of changed how I was approaching music at that point.
So if we look at your piece, Fireworks Interlude number 1, the one that Rick played on his channel, that obviously has a lot of dissonance to it, and yet there are certain parts of it that remind me of Frank Zappa's influence. Like, there's one pause in there that reminds me of the Black Page.
Yeah, I've certainly heard the Black Page. I can't remember it, and you'd have to maybe tell me you'd have to probably tell me which measure or something.
How did you go about composing something like that?
I guess I should take a step back. So a lot of the stuff that I've actually put in videos that I've shared, stuff that's on my albums, a lot of that stuff would have been written pen and paper, and something just kind of wherever I could write, like lunch break at work or whatever. But and the Fireworks, that one was written in 2021 when I was coming off that 10-year break. And I had this idea that I might try to develop a kind of improvisatory vocabulary, which I had never done before. I don't know. I was just trying something new. And the way I write some of that stuff is I just sit and I write very fast, and I'm just kind of playing. What I'm looking for are phrases that I find catchy or beautiful or that have a certain emotion to them, that's something that just feels right. And then when I find something, I'll start doing little variations on it, and I'll keep looking for something else. And then I'll try to play those things off each other. And to me, the Fireworks one is I personally find it pretty catchy. And I feel like it's a bunch of little pop hooks that are kind of being intermingled or juggled or something like that, that kind of come and go. And so I just sat for that one, I sat with Guitar Pro and just input it about as fast as I could type. But it wasn't just that. It was a whole, I did a whole bunch more than that. That's why it's called number one. Mm-hmm. And so I sat for an afternoon and I just did that as kind of an improvisation, but I'm not holding an instrument. What in the past I would have done pen and paper. And I actually played it for a friend of mine who's like, you got to do something with this, you know? And I'm like, well, I'm making these videos and they have to be a minute. So I'll just find a 1 minute segment that feels like a start, like beginning, middle, end kind of thing. And so that's what I did. And so there's more, there could be a number two. But the reason I was doing that one was because I was really into this song called Fireworks by Mitski. And I was thinking I might do a cover of it. And what ended up happening anyway was I just said, well, I'm going to write an interlude for it. And so that's why it's called Fireworks Interlude. It doesn't borrow any material from her melodic themes at all, but the chords will fit. And it's not her chord progression, although those two chords happen in her song, but it's not like a cover or a variation or something. And then I did a version of it that I've also put on my channel, my YouTube channel, that's 11.5 minutes, where I am just improvising. I didn't use pen and paper or whatever. And that's an exploratory improvisation. And that's Fireworks Interlude number 0. And that's also on the same album that I've released.
Fascinating. So did you said that you improvised it. So you improvised it, meaning as you were inputting it, it was just a flow and you didn't have your guitar with you?
Right. Yeah. And it's not really for any particular instrument, but so in the past, what I would always do, would be I would, I don't know, sit at the kitchen table or whatever, or like I said, lunch break at work or on the train, and I would compose, or in class when I was in high school, and I would just sit and compose. And sometimes that would be stuff that was very, very, very thought out, especially if there were dense chords or something like that. Or if I were, like if I was going to do an entire piece of music, like I wrote a couple of wind quintets that way, string quartet, that kind of thing. But on occasion, what I would do is something that, I think of it as a free improvisation where I just write as fast as I can think it. And then I don't do any revision. If I do revision, then I've changed it, But right. With that one, there wouldn't have been any revision to it, I don't think.
So if there's I'm sure that there are a lot of people watching wishing that they can do what you do, which is to sit and write without an instrument, to put pen to paper or to use Guitar Pro. How can somebody learn to do that or chance their arm at doing that and just start? Where would you recommend they start at?
I guess a good way to do it, obviously there's you can train your relative pitch. But I think the way to, at least the way I did it, was by trying it, taking it home, playing it or whatever, taking it to an instrument, playing it, and then seeing what comes out, and then just learning how to make what comes out the thing you want to come out. And I mean, it wasn't like I just sort of did it on occasion. It was more, this is the kind of thing I might do 10 or 12 hours a day or something. It's a lifestyle.
So you would write a little piece, let's say when you were first starting, you would, let's say you'd write 4 bars, you'd bring it home and you'd be playing and you'd think bars 1 and 2 sound like crap. I'm not going to
all of it
write that figure again.
Yeah, all of it just wasn't what I was imagining. I thought I was writing, what was in my head was not what was coming out. But the shape was if I in my head I wanted to go up, it would go up. It just I wouldn't notice that I had written, like I would think, oh, a tritone would sound cool. Well, the way I do it now, I never almost ever think about the intervals or anything like that. I'm not thinking about scales. I'm not thinking, I do need to know what the kind of the harmonic bed is. Like for something like Heap Variation, it started with the chords that are the chords in the chorus of a song called The Heap. And it starts by quoting the melody of that chorus. But then I just ran with that and did something very free. That one I recall, Heap Variation, I recall that when I went to record it, I did change a couple of things. Just because I thought, it'd be better to do something else, just like a few notes. But it's just one way of working that I find very liberating, but it was out of necessity because I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to be composing. So I mean, honestly, I was in the military and I composed, I lasted 7 months and I was composing at my desk and I was composing in basic training. And one day they actually put me in a room and just give this kid some paper and just to compose, which I did not have I won't talk about that today, but it wasn't a great experience. But I mean, it's just something I couldn't shake. You know what I mean? It was just this total obsession. And compulsion. So if you're going to make me sit in a math class or whatever, I'll pass, but I'm going to write music. I don't recommend that. I'm not saying that. So that is not necessarily my answer in terms of how to learn it, but that's what I did. Sorry.
Yeah, it seems like like pretty much what I said. You know, you write down something that you think is going to sound like what's inside your head, then try it out and start making corrections based on what your initial expectation was. If that makes any sense. Yeah,
and I think there's also, for me, like there's some stuff you're missing. Not you, but there's some stuff like I'm not writing for a particular instrument, but sometimes I am. Like I said, I wrote a wind quintet, but something that's not there are kind of the timbres intermingling in the air. And so, you know, the overtones clashing and that sort of thing. So that's something you learn. That's an orchestration consideration as well. And just especially, you know, like the wind quintet I'm thinking of, I wrote that in 1993. And it did get performed in 95, so I got to rehearse and everything. It was fine, but the only way I could test it was on a keyboard, you know, right. After I'd written it, because I do want to hear it in the air. And with that, I would hear it and then maybe go back downstairs and make revisions. But I didn't do the revisions there at the keyboard, usually. It would just be, I don't like this measure. Let me try something else. Just sort of like the same thing happens when you're writing a song. You come up, or like with a guitar, you come up with a part and maybe you record it and sit back and listen to it. Or you give it a couple of days and go, I don't like that. Let me try something else.
Speaking of the guitar, because you just had me think of this. Let's say a tune like Fireworks Interlude No. 1, did that push your technique? And are you using your writing to push your technique? Because that seems like it's a very challenging thing to play. And or did transcribing push your technique? Because I've seen that you've done a few transcriptions. You did a Michael Brecker transcription and a Miles transcription.
Yeah, for me, it's very much about what I want to hear. And I don't like the idea of not producing the notes that I want to produce just because of the shape of the guitar. Often I feel that I wish I could just hire somebody, you know, to play it. Some of the harder stuff, because like the idea of having to keep it up, you know, to be able to play it all the time, which would be great. I'd love to play some of this stuff live. But it could be very challenging, especially with this Strat, because it's a long story, but I've never played a Strat before, and the tension on it is making my fingernail rip away from my finger, so I'd have to go 2 days without playing. I mean, that's why I got the Jazzmaster, although I don't know if that's going to be better for that kind of stuff. But Yeah, to answer your question, yes. The idea is write what you want to hear and then figure out how to make it work. Now, there's a video I made of a song that I called Decatur Fusion. It's the ending of the song, and it was originally written in 1993. And I did post this video. It's actually one of my more popular guitar videos. But I had never played that on guitar. I wasn't thinking I ever would, but it's kind of what you're talking about. I was like, let me see if I can do this. And I did have to simplify that. And I spent about, I don't know, a good week every day trying to come up with fingering so I wouldn't have to simplify it, but I couldn't. I just couldn't play it. I know there are people who could, for sure, but I couldn't do it. Certainly not with decent phrasing, you know. So I had to simplify it, but it still really, really pushed me. Yeah. It's one measure. Like a couple of these that I've done, they're not that hard, except there will be one or two little phrases, and that'll be what I have to really, really work on for several hours to be able to play it. But most of it isn't that hard. It's just usually there's a measure or two. And that's what happened with the one I mentioned from 1993. There's like this one phrase that I just couldn't get. So,
can you talk about the harmony that's in Angry Bebop Dusty Interlude Prototype?
Yes. So
great title.
Thanks. That started because I just, like I said, I was starting to make videos, and I thought there's a version of it that's very chaotic at the beginning. Where it's like, you know, it's this thing, I blurted that out. I just wanted to make a video with something that it's not bebop, I know, but I don't know the bebop language or whatever. But I had heard some music that it didn't sound exactly like that, but it had what I was like, oh, that's some angry bebop, and I was like, oh, that's kind of, you know, and so that intro is just the kind of thing I would have played in high school. It's using the kind of pattern I would have used. It's just straight out of like 15-year-old me or whatever. So that was not written on a like pen and paper or whatever. I just blurted that out with stuff that came naturally. And that was going to be the entire video. And so then I just took that, I put some drums behind it. I put some chords behind it and a bass, sort of my version of a walking bass line, but it wasn't meant to sound like jazz or anything. And so what I was doing was I did that, and that was going to be the whole video. And I go, but I need to end it. So, and I go, I'm going to end it on this chord. Bring. I go, that doesn't sound finished. And I go, all right, so let me add another chord. And if you notice, the video like has all these edits between the chords. And
I didn't notice. I don't think I noticed that.
If you watch it, like I think every chord that happens has an edit to the next, because I wasn't. So you're actually watching me record the song, and yeah. So I don't know what the chords are. I just played stuff I wanted to hear. I couldn't tell you the names of them, but I remember that. I thought, like, finished. No, one more chord. Ding. Okay, no, let me do a drum fill. No, it still doesn't feel finished. Let me add another chord. Let me add another one. I'm like, actually, let me add a guitar solo. So then I just came up with the chord progression. So this is a song of mine. It's called Angry Bebop Dusty Interlude. And that is the chord progression that happens behind the guitar solo. So I came up with that and put that down, and then improvised a guitar solo on top of that. And that was supposed to be the end. And then it just turned into a whole thing. And now it's a kind of a long piece with different sections. But that's when I said I could talk about the harmony, that's what I meant. Like, that's how it came about. That would be not necessarily how I usually work, but I've been working more like that recently.
And I'm going to just I'm just going to throw these titles at you. Twist and Thrum. I was telling you this before, that it has just a sprinkling of what reminds me of Beach Boys and some of the psychedelic Beatles aspects, but yet there's no trace of them there.
I told all my friends, you know angels. They say you are a crooked child, but you swarm on ancient days. Memories, it will kill me, burn that pink thing.
Were there any of those influences in there?
I didn't listen a whole lot to the Beatles, especially during my, I didn't growing up, hardly at all. I don't think I ever put on a Beatles song. And then once I started doing music, it wasn't really on my radar. So I definitely got into them later, like when I was by my late 20s. Excuse me. And then there were some songs here and there I got into, like people would put them on tapes. I mean, I'm making it sound like, who's this band you're talking about? I mean, I was familiar, but even now, most Beatles songs, if you were to name, I would know the song, but I wouldn't know what album it's on for a lot of their songs. I'm not even sure of the titles of all their albums, but I think they're amazing. Similar with the Beach Boys. In fact, I probably spent more time listening to the Beach Boys, also late 20s. A friend of mine gave me a collection that he made, and it was amazing. And I really got into Brian Wilson, and I think there must be influence there, but it's not, if I were to make a list of influences, that wouldn't necessarily be, they wouldn't necessarily be near the top.
But it's part of your roots. It's in there.
It's as in there as probably 100 or 500 other bands and artists I've listened to. But they're not people that I listened to for years. It'd be more like I had a phase for a couple months. But still love some, I mean, if, you know. Yeah.
How about The Shadows Have Thinned, which is incredible.
No, thank you.
Like you really have, I mean, this is the reason why I'm having you on the channel, is that your execution of your original ideas, it's just irrefutable that you have a very singular voice that you've obviously spent a lot of time working on. Talk to me about that tune.
Yeah, so that one, I really enjoy that one, talking about that one, because it's something I had never done before, which is, so I was recording Twist and Thrum that you had mentioned before, and I was recording the vocal for the verse, which was very meticulously written out. It took me a long time to record that song because I would do stuff like this, and I just started improvising and improvised a different melody. And it's a melody that I thought at first might be a backing vocal, but it doesn't fit with the main melody of Twist and Thrum. It doesn't work as a backing vocal. Not the dissonance isn't interesting. It just sounds bad to me. So I liked it though. So what I did was a save as, and the first verse of Twist and Thrum has the exact same backing, same instrumentation. It's mixed differently, but it's the same instrumentation, like literally the same synth sounds. It's just a save as Twist and Thrum. But I improvised that, and then the rest of the song, I did have this one line, this kind of phrase. I'll wake up sometimes or whatever and just have a phrase in my head, and it'll kind of like an earworm, but it'll be a phrase. And this phrase was, the shadows have thinned, the sins are mostly forgiven. And so I was like, I'll just use that as the lyric, but I didn't know what the melody was going to be. And I just put down a kick drum and a bass just to have temporarily, but I ended up keeping it just to give me something to sing over. And the idea was that then I would fill in the backing. But yeah, I just made it up pretty fast, like over a couple of days. I just improvised the lyrics and then just threw in little sections, and then there are 2 little piano interludes, and those I pretty much just made up on the spot. And I started doing a little fugue, but that I was sort of improvising on piano, but it was getting too complicated, and it was just, it felt like this is going to slow things down. This has got to be a fast. I want this done. And like it lost the spontaneity of it. I didn't want to be thinking about stuff. I wanted the whole song to be spontaneous because that's how it felt like it should be. And then to suddenly have something that was meticulously worked out where I'd thought about it a lot just felt wrong. So I saved that, and maybe I'll get back to it. But that's how that song came about. Yeah.
You seem like a kind of guy who gets things done. So what would your advice be to people who are either budding writers or experienced writers on how they can, a lot of people have problems completing things. So what would your advice be to give somebody the tools to be able to finish something? Like, what could you suggest that would give them the impetus to finish?
Well, I think it would, of course, depend on the individual, but I think what I would ask is, what do you think it is that's stopping you from finishing stuff? And try to pinpoint that. And it could be a lot of things. Broadly speaking, what I think I've encountered the most is, number one, it's a confidence issue.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, there could be a lot of reasons for that. And I've seen where somebody is hanging out with a certain crowd of people who aren't particularly supportive, and that can actually make it difficult, especially if you're playing them stuff and they tell you, I don't like this. Obviously that's going to make it hard. But there could be a whole lot of reasons. So I would try to figure out where the confidence issue is. But I will say about that anybody who makes music, there's going to be someone who doesn't like it. In fact, there's going to be someone who probably hates it, what you're doing. So you just have to at some point rely on your own taste, in the sense that if at any point you loved that idea and you were excited to play it for somebody, then I think you owe it to them, to the people who need to hear it, to finish it, and you owe it to yourself to finish it. But the other thing I've encountered pretty commonly with people who aren't finishing stuff is that they haven't honed their craft. They have not worked on craft. So I make this distinction between inspiration and craft. And it's not something I thought about until recently, because I've gotten a lot of requests and comments for a couple of years now, but especially more now, to make some videos about my music making process. And as I started to think about it, a lot of times what they're asking for are scales. It just depends. If it's on my songs, like the songs you've mentioned, nobody ever asks, what are the scales on The Shadows Have Thinned, But on something like Fireworks, I might get that question multiple times a day sometimes. And I'm genuinely not thinking about scales. I've never practiced that kind of stuff extensively. A lot of the stuff that I hear people ask me are using like a Messiaen mode or something like that. I never even heard of that until I think I saw a Rick Beato video a couple of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know what it is. Like I couldn't produce it for you.
It would be interesting to see you with a piece of staff paper, the camera over the top, and you starting to write, starting to improvise, writing, and talking, talking your process through that.
I've thought about how I would do something like that, or I have an idea. There's one piece of mine. It's not finished, but I've shared it, and it's about 30 seconds long. I think it's 26 seconds, but it has just about everything I would want to talk about if I were to talk about a significant aspect of my process. And what I mean by inspiration versus craft is you get the idea, which is very mysterious. I have no idea where that comes from. I've heard people say they dream, they might dream a song, but I haven't done that. And if I did, I'd probably be like, no, that's not very good. You need to dream a better song. But the point is just that you have the idea. For me, the song I'm thinking about in particular just came from noodling. For something like Heat Variation, it came from, I knew I wanted to start with the chord progression and the melody from the chorus of the heap. So that was the starting place. But how did I write the heap? That would have been just strumming on a guitar and humming. And sometimes you blurt out a whole section, like you've written songs. Yeah. Sometimes you blurt out a section, and sometimes you have to go, let me try this. Maybe I need a bridge. And so like with the one I'm thinking about, I had two ideas, and one of them I had to develop for the first half. And then I had to figure out how to connect that to the other idea that was quite different. It's a change in feel in the piece. And the craft there is figuring out how to develop that first idea from the seed that was about one measure long, maybe two measures. How do you turn that into something? And it's probably very, very vague since I'm not playing actual music to show what I mean. But it's basically just you have an idea. How do you turn that into a song? Or you have two ideas. How do you connect those? What do you need to do to make that into a something that actually feels like a song? And in my experience, that's something that isn't talked about a lot, or it isn't worked on a lot. Like that's the hard work. And I do think those can be very difficult to untangle. Sometimes it's not so clear, the distinction between inspiration and craft, because you can say like, oh, I need a bridge here. Let me craft that. And then it just pops out. The first thing you try is you were inspired. I'm not saying that those are hard, that they are completely distinct. I just find them useful for how I might communicate about my process.
Do you believe in writer's block?
Well, I don't know. I don't believe, like, I could definitely write a song right now, right this second, but it might not be that good. So then there's the question, if by writer's block you mean, do I believe that it's possible to go a while without having an idea that feels inspired or exciting? Yeah, that's a very difficult question, because you can come up with something and I don't know. You could just...
I guess writer's block being you sitting with a piece of paper, with your guitar, without your guitar, with the piano, without the piano, and nothing comes. And it just, you try and put a few notes together and it just is not working for you.
I think that can happen, that for whatever reason it's not happening today. But if I then go over to another song I'm working on, then all of a sudden I'm okay. I'm coming up with stuff. But I've definitely had the situation where I need something to happen and I'm just not liking the stuff I'm coming up with, but I am coming up with stuff. I'm just throwing it out because I don't think it just doesn't feel right. I think if I had to give a yes or no answer, it would be no.
Yeah, me too. I don't believe in it. And I think that part of not believing in it, like, eliminates that, that barrier. I more think kind of like you think. If I'm trying to write lyrics and it's not happening, then I just stop. I don't think, oh my God, I've lost it.
Yeah, and I do think, like, I have been in the situation where I need to come up with something, or I just force myself, and maybe the first hour it's not coming, but it you know, after pushing and pushing, it might come. But that's when I really feel, for whatever reason, I need to finish something. And it's just trying to access the place where I can find it. Maybe I do a lot of pacing. I think sometimes you have to figure out how to get it out, but yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, that's good. I'm going to use the pacing.
I
Use
pace
that
a lot.
technique.
That's the video, is me pacing around. That's my process video. It's just me pacing around in my office, or
Okay.
eating baby carrots or something, just thinking. A lot of it is just staring off into space, but I prefer to pace around.
Your tune Counting Backwards has a distinct classical influence. You have cello, oboe, you have an operatic voice. Talk about how you integrate that with your modern compositions.
How I integrate
Your classical aspects into, stuff with guitar and keyboards and etc.
Yeah, I don't really think about it. I just hear it in my head and then try to make it happen. But there's also a question of limitations. So it's pretty common that I've done something where I wish I had an orchestra, but I don't. Or I wish I had something that I don't have, and so I have to come up with something else. I think that it's important, unless you're really just straight up doing a demo or a mock-up, to try to make it sound like you wrote it that way on purpose, like to work with what you have. And I think it's similar. There's something similar that goes on with which process somebody is using to make music. I could talk more about that, but that would get back to something like notating versus sitting with a guitar and humming or something like that. At any rate, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I really don't think about it that much. I just kind of sit down and just start making music. Just start working, and very often I'm frustrated, though. With that one, I was quite frustrated. I remember being quite frustrated, but I'm less so now. I went back and listened to it for the first time in years, maybe over 15 years. I don't know, 12 years or something. I guess it came out in 2007. So, and was like, oh, this isn't as bad as I remembered. But
well, one of the things, and this is like one of the final statements, questions that I'm going to have for you, and that is one of the things that I notice is that your music is not very self-conscious. You are very much, at least to me, you might feel very self-conscious, but I can't tell that when I hear your music. Your music is very bold in its statement. And that obviously is maturity and having written hundreds, if not thousands of tunes. That much is obvious. How can you suggest, or what words of wisdom can you give, budding writers and experienced writers, as I mentioned before, the ability to be able to do that when you have all of this social media, Instagram pressure, worry about what you're doing, be careful what you put out there, you're as good as your last note, and all of that stuff. How can we be more bold in our compositions and in our statement? Because obviously you also have the multimedia statement as well. So there's a lot of things going on that just say, hey, I'm Dan, I'm here, this is what I'm offering. I don't know if that made any sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think it does. And I think so. What I'm about to say might actually not be true, but I think it is. But I think that for that, it's a matter of just, well, for me, being in a room by myself and just making stuff that I like. And I've always thought, you know, when I was younger meaning like early, when I started thinking about this stuff, maybe in my, I don't remember when, 20s or something, I just thought, you can look silly. Like, there are people who are going to hate what you do and they're going to tell me I suck. Which I do get that. You suck. Don't quit your day job or whatever. Wow, you're really awful. But when I'm in my room, just pacing around or just making stuff, or I'm making a video, and it's the same as when I was a kid, you know, especially as an only child, but just being in a room and just not thinking about that, just making whatever. And then being willing to share that. And I talked about the confidence before. So I do share stuff that's not finished yet, although I've started, well, I won't talk, but I do share stuff that's not finished. Like, this is an idea I'm working on. And that's something that can be a little dangerous, because I talked about the confidence issue earlier, because if you don't get great response to that, then it could make you not want to finish it or make you less eager to finish it. But that stuff is like a roll of the dice. Because I've had the same video get just made fun of. One time I post it, another time I post it just gets totally ignored, and then another time gets, like, you know, a lot of likes and plays and whatever. It's just, you don't, especially if you don't have an audience that's established, you really don't know where the algorithm's going to send stuff. So there's that. But when you're making it, in my opinion, the way to go is to just be in your bubble, in a sense. Now, like I said, that might not be true. Maybe I am less like that than I think I am. But I can say that once I start working, I go into a flow state. I think that would be I think that's right. And I'll do something like in a video or in a song, and it just kind of makes me excited, even though I might get tired of it, like by the next day or something. But that was what I was saying earlier. If at any point you loved what you were doing, you have to rely on that, in my opinion. I know other people have said, if later you don't like it anymore, you get tired of it, you should throw it out. I don't understand that personally. In fact, I even think you should share creative missteps. Like, if you make something, you love it, you're making it, and you think, this is really cool, I'm enjoying this, not just the process, but I can't stop listening back to it. Like, this is really cool. And then somehow you become convinced that it was a misstep. Like, it kind of went wrong. And you play it for people you trust, and they go, yeah, this didn't really work out. I feel you should share that. I don't think you should share stuff that you think is bad. I'm not saying if you have an idea you really can't stand, you should just finish it and share it. I don't actually agree with that. What I'm saying is, if you loved it while you were making it, and then for some reason your brain rewired a little, it's just you know what I mean? Something happens and now you don't. You should still share it. And that part of it is just kind of like closing your eyes and hitting submit, you know, on the video, which I've done that, and just put it out there. I don't know if that the boldness thing, it's a tough one, because like, if you try to do that, it can become contrived, I think, but I could be completely wrong. Somebody could say, I was trying to be bold here on this song, and I'm like, oh, I love it. You know, I don't really know how it works, but that's my first thought.
Well, that's fantastic. That's a great piece of advice to end on. Yeah. And we could do another 2 hours.
Yeah.
But anyways, Dan, I wanted to just thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you came here to do this and to inspire me, and I'm sure tons of other people that are watching this, because
Thank you.
whenever I talk with you, I feel like, hey, I can do this. And I'm turning off that critical voice, and I'm just going to go for it because I want to find something that I love, that I do.
Yeah.
And I think that that pursuit is really at the core, and a lot of times music school takes that away from you. So at any rate, I want to thank you and, you know, end on that positive note. And I'm going to put links to your records, if you have any records on Spotify, and your Patreon, where I know that you have oh wait, you don't do Patreon, right?
I don't.
But tabs, if people want to get tabs for your music.
I have some. I've started putting them up on Ko-fi.
Okay.
And
I'll put the link.
Yep, thanks. And I also post videos. Anything I put on Ko-fi, I've made videos. Sometimes big ones, like full screen, but certainly shorts as well. The vertical. There's a little small, but I'm always happy to share that stuff.
Perfect.
With picking when I think it might help with my, at least the articulations that worked for me, you know, for like hybrid picking or whatever. But.
Brilliant. I'm sure anybody who's going to get better they're going to get better playing those figures that you've composed. And yeah.
Thanks.
Well,
that's cool.
Dan, thank you so much. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great chatting. Thanks for having me.
All the very best to you.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.